The autumn wind carried the scent of coming rain as Fiona Blackett stood alone at her parents' fresh graves. Her tears had long since dried up, leaving only a hollow ache in her chest that seemed to grow with each passing day. Ardmore, Colorado was supposed to be her new beginning in 1876, not the place where she would lose everything she held dear. "I'm sorry, Pa. I'm sorry, Ma," she whispered, clutching the simple wooden cross she'd carved herself when the town refused to provide proper markers. The influenza had taken them both within a week of each other, and in this small mining town where they'd only just arrived, nobody seemed to care about the grief of a newcomer. At 22, Fiona was now entirely alone, inhabiting the small cabin her father had purchased at the edge of town with the last of their savings. The wind tugged at her dark brown hair as she turned away from the hillside, her navy blue dress the only decent one she owned billowing around her ankles as she made her way back toward town. The main street of Ardmore was bustling, despite the threatening weather. Men hurried between the general store and saloon, women gathered in front of the mercantile, and children darted between wagons and horses tied to hitching posts. No one acknowledged Fiona as she walked through town, her head bowed, her grief a silent companion that no one could see but everyone seemed to avoid. "Miss Blackett," Sheriff Miller nodded curtly as she passed the jailhouse. He was one of the few who bothered to speak to her at all. "Storm's coming in. Best get home before it hits." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, her voice soft from disuse. Fiona quickened her pace, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. The cabin was a half-mile walk from town, and already the first fat droplets of rain were beginning to fall. She just reached the edge of town when the skies opened up. Within seconds, she was drenched, her dress clinging to her slender frame as she pushed on through the mud. The cabin was in sight when her foot caught in a rut, sending her sprawling forward into the muck. For a moment, Fiona simply lay there, the cold rain pelting her back, mud soaking through her clothes. What did it matter if she got up or not? Who would care if she simply disappeared into the earth like her parents? Miss, are you all right?" The voice cut through the drumming of the rain, deep and concerned. Fiona raised her head to see a man dismounting from a chestnut stallion. He splashed through the mud toward her, his tall frame silhouetted against the gray sky, a long duster flapping around his legs. "Here, let me help you," he said, reaching down with a strong hand. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but she could see concern etched in the lines around his eyes. Pride made her hesitate, but practicality won out. She took his offered hand and felt herself pulled effortlessly to her feet. "Thank you," she managed, attempting to brush mud from her dress, a futile effort that only smeared it further. "You're the Blackett girl, aren't you?" he asked, and she nodded, expecting the conversation to end there like it always did when people recognized her as the orphan newcomer. Instead, he gestured to her cabin. "Let's get you out of this rain." Too tired and cold to protest, Fiona nodded again and allowed him to lead her horse alongside them as they hurried to the cabin. Once on the porch, she fumbled with the key, her fingers numb from the cold. "Allow me," he said gently, taking the key from her trembling hands. He unlocked the door and stepped back, allowing her to enter first. The cabin was dark and cold, just as she'd left it that morning. Fiona moved automatically to light the lantern on the table, then the small stove in the corner. "I'm Tanner Hayes," the man said, removing his hat to reveal a head of thick brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey. He stayed by the door, respectful of her space despite having helped her home. "I have a ranch about 5 miles east of town." "Fiona Blackett," she replied, though he already knew. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Hayes, but I'm fine now." He studied her for a moment, taking in her mud-covered clothes, the dark circles beneath her blue eyes, the thinness of her face. "You don't look fine, Miss Blackett." When was the last time you ate a proper meal? The question caught her off guard. When had she last eaten? She'd had coffee that morning, but food. "I'm managing," she said defensively. Tanner nodded slowly. "I don't doubt you're trying. I heard about your parents. I'm sorry for your loss." The simple words of sympathy, the first she'd heard since the perfunctory condolences at the hasty funeral, threatened to crack the fragile wall she'd built around her emotions. "Thank you," she whispered, turning away to hide the sudden tears that sprang to her eyes. She heard him shift his weight, boots creaking on the wooden floor. "I'll be back tomorrow, Miss Blackett." Before she could ask why, he had placed his hat back on his head, tipped it politely, and was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Through the small window, she watched his tall figure mount his horse and ride away into the rain. True to his word, Tanner Hayes returned the next day. Fiona had just finished washing her mud-stained dress when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She peered through the window to see the cowboy dismounting, something clutched carefully in one hand. When she opened the door, he removed his hat and offered her a small bouquet of wildflowers, purple asters, and golden black-eyed Susans tied with a simple piece of twine. "For you, Miss Blackett," he said, extending the flowers. "I thought they might brighten your day." Fiona stared at the flowers, then at the man holding them. His expression was earnest, without a hint of pity or mockery. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness that she didn't know how to respond. "Why?" she asked, making no move to take them. Tanner shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with her question but determined to answer. "Because grief is a heavy burden to carry alone." "I know something about that." She searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity in his warm eyes. Slowly, she reached out and took the flowers, their bright colors stark against her pale hand. "Would you like to come in for coffee?" she offered, surprising herself with the invitation. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his face from handsome to breathtaking. "I'd like that very much, Miss Blackett." Over coffee in chipped cups, all that remained of her mother's prized china, Fiona learned that Tanner Hayes was 30 years old, had come to Colorado 5 years earlier, and had built a modest but successful cattle ranch. He was unmarried, had no family nearby, and made a habit of coming into Ardmore once a week for supplies. "I saw you at the cemetery yesterday," he admitted as he accepted a second cup. "You looked like you were carrying the weight of the world." Fiona stared into her coffee. "They're gone. Everyone I ever loved is gone." "I know what that's like," he said quietly. "Lost my parents in a fire when I was 16, my brother to the war a few years later." She looked up, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "No," he answered honestly. "But you learn to carry it differently. It becomes part of you rather than something crushing you." They talked until the coffee was gone and shadows lengthened across the floor. As Tanner prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Miss Blackett, I've got more meat than I can use from a recent hunt. Would it be all right if I brought some by tomorrow?" Fiona wanted to refuse out of pride, but her empty pantry and growling stomach made her nod. "That would be kind of you, Mr. Hayes." "Tanner," he corrected with a small smile. "If we're to be friends, you might as well use my given name." "Fiona," she offered in return, the first real smile in weeks tugging at her lips. As promised, Tanner returned the next day with a wrapped package of venison and another small bunch of flowers. This pattern continued for days that stretched into weeks, Tanner appearing with provisions, flowers, and most importantly, conversation that gradually eased Fiona from her isolation. On a crisp October afternoon, as they sat on her porch drinking coffee, he made an unexpected proposal. "The ranch needs help," he said, seemingly focused on the distant mountains, "especially with winter coming. I was wondering if you might consider a position there." Fiona nearly choked on her coffee. What kind of position? Cooking, mostly, mending, looking after the house. He turned to face her then, his expression serious. "It's honest work, Fiona, with fair pay. You'd have your own room in the main house. I have 2 hands who bunk in the separate quarters, good men who know to mind their manners." She considered his offer, turning it over in her mind. The truth was, her funds were dwindling rapidly. She had tried to find work in town, but no one seemed willing to hire the strange, grieving girl. "I don't know, Tanner, it seems improper," he nodded, understanding her concern. "Mrs. Wilkins from town comes out twice a week to help with laundry. She's known for her proper ways and sharp tongue. No one would question your reputation with her around." He smiled slightly. "Besides, you'd be doing me a favor. None of us can cook worth a damn." Fiona couldn't help but laugh at his candid admission. "Let me think about it, of course." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Take all the time you need." It took her only 2 days to make her decision. The cabin, once a symbol of her family's fresh start, had become a tomb of memories. Perhaps Tanner was right, perhaps she needed to learn to carry her grief differently. When she told him yes, his face lit up with such genuine pleasure that she felt a small flicker of warmth in her chest, the first hint that her heart wasn't completely frozen by loss. Tanner's ranch, which he called Whispering Pines, was modest compared to some spreads but impressive for a man who'd built it from nothing. The main house was a solid 2-story structure of timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings, including a barn, bunkhouse, and smokehouse, formed a rough courtyard. Beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed lazily in the autumn sun. "It's beautiful," Fiona said, as Tanner helped her down from the wagon that carried her and her few possessions. "It's home," he replied simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. Inside, the house was clean but clearly in need of a woman's touch. Functional furniture, minimal decorations, and a kitchen that showed signs of bachelor cooking greeted her. Tanner showed her to a bright corner bedroom upstairs, larger than she expected, with a real feather bed and a window overlooking the distant mountains. "This was meant to be a guest room," he explained, placing her trunk near the wardrobe. "But we don't get many visitors out here." "It's perfect," she said, genuinely touched by the care he'd taken to prepare the space for her. The first week at Whispering Pines was an adjustment for everyone. The ranch hand's Charlie, a wizened old cowboy who'd been with Tanner from the start, and Miguel, a quiet young man with quick hands and a quicker smile, were initially awkward around Fiona but soon warmed to her presence, especially after tasting her cooking. "Miss Fiona," Charlie declared after his first bite of her venison stew, "if you ever decide to leave this place, I'm going with you. This is the first decent meal I've had in years." Tanner threw a biscuit at the old cowboy, but his eyes crinkled with laughter. "Traitor." Fiona found herself smiling more, the weight of grief still present but somehow easier to bear in this place with these people who seemed to accept her without question. As October turned to November, the routine of ranch life became a comfort. Fiona rose early to prepare breakfast for the men before they headed out to work. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and gradually adding small touches to make the house feel more like a home. Wildflowers in mason jars, curtains sewn from fabric Tanner brought from town, a quilt she began piecing together from scraps. Twice a week, as promised, Mrs. Wilkins arrived, a formidable widow with iron-gray hair and opinions to match. Contrary to Fiona's fears, the older woman became something of an ally, teaching her the efficient ways of managing a ranch house and offering gruff but genuine advice. "That Tanner Hayes is a good man, Mrs. Wilkins said one afternoon as they folded sheets fresh from the line. "Folks in town talk. Of course, young woman living out here with 3 men, but I set them straight. Told them I'd vouch for your character and his." "Thank you," Fiona replied, touched by the woman's support. "I don't know what I would have done without this opportunity." Mrs. Wilkins gave her a shrewd look. "He looks at you, you know, when you're not watching." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "We're friends, that's all." The older woman merely hummed in response, a knowing glint in her eye. Fiona tried to dismiss Mrs. Wilkins's observation, but found herself increasingly aware of Tanner's presence. She noticed the way his eyes followed her across a room, how he seemed to find reasons to be near the house when she hung laundry, the thoughtful little gifts he continued to bring her, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry he'd found in town, wildflowers even as they grew scarcer with the approaching winter. Most evenings, after Charlie and Miguel retired to the bunkhouse, Tanner and Fiona would sit by the fire. Sometimes they talked about his plans for the ranch, about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about books they'd read or places they'd seen. Other times they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence, Tanner carving wood or cleaning tack while Fiona sewed or knitted. One such evening, as the first snow of the season fell softly outside, Tanner set aside the bridle he was mending and looked at her with unusual seriousness. "Fiona, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her hand stilled on the shirt she was mending. "Yes, the anniversary of your parents' passing is coming up next week. I wondered if you might like to visit their graves." The simple question, evidence that he'd been paying attention, remembering details about her grief that she herself tried to forget, brought tears to her eyes. "I would," she whispered, "but I don't think I can face it alone." Tanner moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. "You won't be alone, Fiona. I told you when we met that I'd help carry your sorrow, and I meant it." Looking into his earnest face, Fiona felt something crack inside her, the ice that had formed around her heart beginning to thaw. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. His arms came around her hesitantly at first, then with gentle strength as her tears came. "I miss them so much," she sobbed against his shirt, the grief she'd been containing for months finally breaking free. "Some days I wake up and for just a moment, I forget they're gone." "I know," he murmured, one hand stroking her back. "I know exactly how that feels." They stayed that way until her tears subsided, neither speaking, just drawing comfort from the shared understanding of loss. When Fiona finally pulled back, embarrassed by her outburst, Tanner kept hold of her hands. "Don't apologize," he said before she could speak. "Grief needs to breathe sometimes." The day of the anniversary dawned cold and clear. Tanner arranged for Mrs. Wilkins to come stay at the ranch for appearances' sake, while he took Fiona into town. They rode together in the wagon, a small bouquet of dried flowers and evergreen sprigs, the best Tanner could find in the winter landscape, nestled carefully beside them. The cemetery on the hill overlooked Ardmore, quiet and solemn beneath a thin layer of snow. Fiona stood before her parents' graves, still marked only by the wooden crosses she'd made. To her surprise, Tanner produced 2 small stone markers from the back of the wagon. "I had them made in Denver," he explained softly. "I hope you don't mind." The simple stones bore her parents' names, birth and death dates, and the words "beloved" and "remembered." Fresh tears filled Fiona's eyes, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. "No one has been this kind to me since they died," she whispered. Tanner helped her place the stones, then stood respectfully back as she arranged the flowers and said her private goodbyes. When she finally turned away from the graves, she felt different lighter, as if some of the crushing weight had indeed been lifted. "I'll carry your sorrow." Tanner had promised that rainy day months ago, and he had kept his word in ways she never could have imagined. As they walked back to the wagon, their breaths forming clouds in the cold air, Fiona impulsively reached for his hand. He looked surprised but pleased, his fingers curling warmly around hers. "Thank you," she said simply. His smile was all the response she needed. Winter settled fully over Colorado, bringing short days and long nights. The ranch work slowed with the season, giving Tanner more time around the house. Fiona found herself looking forward to these shared hours, teaching him to make decent biscuits in the kitchen, listening to him read aloud by the fire, learning to play checkers, which he always let her win, and cards, which he decidedly did not. Christmas approached, bringing with it a newfound excitement Fiona hadn't expected to feel again. She secretly knitted Tanner a scarf. Using yarn Mrs. Wilkins helped her dye a rich brown that matched his eyes. For Charlie and Miguel, she made new mittens and preserved fruit from the cellar's stores. On Christmas Eve, after a dinner that even Charlie declared fit for a king, they gathered in the main room where Tanner had set up a small pine tree decorated with paper stars, dried berries, and a few precious glass ornaments he'd ordered from Denver. "This is for you," he said, handing Fiona a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found it empty. "I thought," he said hesitantly, "that you might want to put a memento of your parents inside. A lock of hair or a tiny photograph, if you have one, to keep them close to your heart." The thoughtfulness of the gift, understanding her need to honor her past while moving forward, moved her deeply. "It's perfect," she said, immediately putting it on. She gave him the scarf next, which he immediately wrapped around his neck despite the warmth of the fire. "Finest gift I've ever received," he declared with such sincerity that she blushed. Charlie and Miguel exchanged knowing glances as they opened their own gifts, but neither commented on the obvious affection growing between their boss and the young woman who had transformed their home. Later, after the others had retired and Fiona was about to head upstairs, Tanner caught her hand. "Walk with me a moment," curious. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him onto the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead in a way they never seemed to in town. "I have something else for you," Tanner said, his voice strangely nervous. "Not exactly a Christmas gift, more of a, well, I'm not sure what to call it." From his pocket, he produced a small pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a simple gold band. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. "This was my mother's," Tanner explained quickly. This isn't a proposal, not exactly." He ran his free hand through his hair. "Lord, I'm making a mess of this." Despite her racing heart, Fiona couldn't help but smile at his uncharacteristic flustering. "Take a deep breath and try again," she suggested gently. He did as instructed, then met her eyes squarely. "Fiona Blackett, I find myself caring for you more deeply than I ever expected. I know you're still healing, still finding your way forward. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, this ring belongs to you." It wasn't a traditional proposal, but it was perfect in its respect for her ongoing grief, in its patience and understanding. Tanner wasn't asking her to forget her past or rush into a future. He was simply offering a promise that he would be there when she was ready to take that step. "May I think about it?" she asked softly. "Take all the time you need," he replied, carefully returning the ring to its pouch and pressing it into her hand. "It's yours to hold onto until you decide what you want to do with it." That night, Fiona lay awake long into the small hours, the pouch containing the ring beneath her pillow. She thought about her parents, how they would have liked Tanner with his honest ways and kind heart. She thought about the grief that had nearly consumed her, and how, gradually, it had transformed into something she could carry rather than something that crushed her. Most of all, she thought about Tanner Hayes, the cowboy who had brought flowers on a rainy day and offered to share her burden when no one else seemed to care. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Tanner alone in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. He looked up as she entered, his face lighting with the smile that had become so dear to her. "Merry Christmas," he said, dusting hay from his hands. Fiona walked directly to him, her steps purposeful. "I've been thinking about your not exactly a proposal." His expression grew serious. And I think," she said carefully, "that my heart has healed enough to make room for new love alongside the memory of those I've lost." She held out the pouch. "I'd like to wear this ring, Tanner." "Not right away. I think we should court properly first, for appearance's sake if nothing else, but with the understanding that my answer is yes." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Truly," she nodded, suddenly shy despite her bold words. "You showed me how to carry my grief when it was too heavy to bear alone. You brought light back into my life when I thought there would only be darkness. How could I not love you for that?" Tanner closed the distance between them, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "May I kiss you, Fiona Blackett?" Her answer was to rise on tiptoe and press her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I think I have since that rainy day when you looked at me with such lost, brave eyes." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both strange and right on her lips. "Thank you for helping me find my way back to happiness." Their courtship became the talk of Ardmore, though most agreed it was a good match, the hard-working rancher and the gentle young woman who had endured so much. Mrs. Wilkins took particular pride in having seen it coming all along, and appointed herself unofficial chaperone, though her sharp eyes grew suspiciously misty when Tanner formally proposed to Fiona on Easter Sunday, 1877. They were married on a perfect June morning, with wildflowers decorating the small church and the whole town in attendance. Even Sheriff Miller shed his usual gruffness to offer sincere congratulations. Fiona wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Wilkins helped her make, and Tanner looked so handsome in his new suit that she nearly forgot her vows when the time came to speak them. "I, Fiona Blackett, take thee, Tanner Hayes," she began, her voice steady despite the tears of joy threatening to spill. As she spoke the familiar words, she felt the presence of her parents not as a weight of grief, but as a warm blessing on this new chapter of her life. Whispering pines flourished under their joint care. With Fiona's practical management of the household accounts alongside Tanner's ranching knowledge, they were able to expand their herd and hire 2 additional hands. The house grew warmer and more inviting with each passing month, truly becoming the home Tanner had envisioned when he first built it. In the spring of 1878, Fiona discovered she was expecting their first child. Tanner's reaction dropping to his knees before her, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach, and whispering promises to their unborn baby confirmed what she already knew. He would be as wonderful a father as he was a husband. Their son, William James Hayes, was born on a snowy December night with Mrs. Wilkins serving as midwife and Tanner pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed in, he approached the bed with such reverence that Fiona laughed despite her exhaustion. "Come meet your son," she invited, lifting the bundle so he could see the tiny red face topped with a shock of dark hair. "He's perfect," Tanner whispered, carefully taking the baby in his arms, "just like his mother." As William grew, joined 2 years later by his sister Alina, Whispering Pines became known throughout the county as one of the most prosperous and welcoming ranches. Travelers spoke of the Hayes family's generosity, particularly toward those experiencing hardship or grief. Once a month, Fiona and Tanner would ride into Ardmore together to visit her parents' graves, now surrounded by a neat fence and always adorned with fresh flowers. These visits were no longer solely occasions of sorrow but opportunities to introduce the children to their heritage, to tell stories that kept the memory of their grandparents alive. "They would have loved you," Fiona told the children as they helped arrange wildflowers on the graves. "And they would have been so proud of the family we've become." On the 5th anniversary of their marriage, Tanner surprised Fiona with a special gift, a small locket identical to the one he'd given her that first Christmas, but sized for a child. "For Alina," he explained. "And I have a pocket watch for William when he's older, so they can carry their own mementos someday." Touched by his continuing thoughtfulness, Fiona kissed him beneath the same porch where he had first offered his mother's ring. "You're a remarkable man, Tanner Hayes." He smiled against her lips. "I'm only as good as the woman who keeps me honest." As they stood together watching the sunset paint the distant mountains, their children playing in the yard with the ranch dogs, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The grief that had once threatened to consume her was still present, a quiet ache that flared on birthdays and anniversaries, but it no longer defined her. "I was thinking," Tanner said, breaking into her thoughts, "that section of land to the north would make a good place for an orchard. William's getting old enough to help with the planting." Fiona leaned her head against his shoulder, savoring the solid strength of him and the future they continued to build together. "An orchard sounds perfect. My mother always wanted apple trees." "Apple trees it is then," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "A living memorial." That night, as their children slept and the ranch settled into peaceful quiet, Fiona and Tanner lay awake talking about their hopes for the coming years, expanding the orchard, building a proper schoolhouse for Ardmore's growing population, perhaps even adding to their family again. "Did you ever imagine we'd come this far?" Fiona asked, nestled in the circle of his arms. "That day in the rain when you found me in the mud," Tanner's laugh rumbled through his chest beneath her ear. "I knew you were special from the first moment. Though I'll admit, I didn't dare hope for all this happiness." "Neither did I," she confessed. "I thought grief was all I'd ever feel again." He tightened his arms around her. "I meant what I said that day about helping carry your sorrow. I always will whenever it gets heavy." "I know," Fiona whispered, raising her face for his kiss. "And I'll help carry yours. That's what love is, isn't it? Sharing the burden so neither has to bear it alone." As they drifted toward sleep, Fiona's thoughts turned to the journey ahead, the joys and sorrows yet to come, the children growing up, the ranch flourishing, the inevitable challenges they would face together. Whatever the future held, she knew with bone-deep certainty that the cowboy who had brought her flowers on her darkest day would remain steadfast beside her, helping to carry whatever burdens life placed upon them, just as she would do for him. In the quiet darkness of their bedroom, with Tanner's steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, Fiona offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the second chance at happiness she had never expected to find. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines that gave their ranch its name, carrying the scent of coming rain, not a harbinger of sorrow this time, but a promise of renewal and growth, of seasons changing and life continuing its beautiful, unpredictable journey. By 1885, Whispering Pines had grown into one of the most successful ranches in Colorado Territory. William, now 7, showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps, trailing Tanner around the property and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. 5-year-old Alina was her mother's shadow, already showing skill with needle and thread, and their youngest, 3-year-old Thomas, was a spirited toddler who kept everyone on their toes. "I think Thomas is going to be our wild one," Fiona remarked one evening as she and Tanner sat on the porch, watching the children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. "Can't imagine where he gets that from," Tanner replied with a wink, earning a playful swat from his wife. Life had settled into a rhythm that balanced work and family, responsibilities and joy. The orchard Tanner had planted in memory of Fiona's parents now produced enough fruit for their own use plus extra to sell in town. The schoolhouse they had helped build was thriving under the direction of a young teacher from back east, whom they had personally recruited. Ardmore itself had grown, the discovery of silver in nearby mountains bringing an influx of miners and businesses. Fiona and Tanner remained connected to the town, attending church services regularly and participating in community affairs. People who had once ignored Fiona's grief now greeted her warmly as Mrs. Hayes, respected rancher's wife and mother. Mrs. Hayes called a voice as they left the general store one Saturday. It was Mrs. Peterson, wife of the bank manager. "We're planning the Harvest Festival Committee. Would you consider joining us this year?" "I'd be delighted," Fiona replied, adjusting Thomas on her hip. She caught Tanner's subtle smile of pride. They both remembered when this same woman had barely acknowledged Fiona's existence during her darkest days. That evening, as they drove the wagon home with the children drowsing in the back, Tanner reached for her hand. "Happy?" The simple question required no thought. "Completely," she answered, squeezing his fingers. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said, his face softened by the golden light of the setting sun. "Sometimes I wake up at night just to make sure you're real, that all this isn't some cowboy's dream." "If it's a dream," Fiona replied, "then we're sharing it." The following spring brought changes to Whispering Pines. Charlie, now in his 70s, decided it was time to retire. The old cowboy had been with Tanner from the beginning, and his departure marked the end of an era. "You've built something fine here," Charlie told them at his farewell dinner. "Finer than anything I've seen in 50 years of ranching. It's been an honor to be part of it." "The honor was ours," Tanner replied, his voice rough with emotion. "There will always be a place for you here, Charlie. This is your home, too." Charlie moved to a small cabin in town, where the Hayes children visited him regularly, bringing baked goods from Fiona and news from the ranch. Though retired, he remained part of their extended family, attending Sunday dinners and special occasions. That same year, Miguel married Lucia, the niece of the town's blacksmith. Tanner built them a small house on the ranch property, ensuring that his trusted foreman could start his family while remaining close to his work. "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become," Fiona told Tanner as they walked hand in hand through the expanded property one evening, surveying the additional pastures, the new barn, the bunkhouse now filled with loyal hands. "Both our parents would be," he corrected gently. "They are part of all this too." In the decade since they'd met, Fiona had found that grief changed its shape but never completely disappeared. There were still moments, her father's birthday, the anniversary of her mother's death, when sorrow would wash over her unexpectedly. But just as Tanner had promised on that rainy day long ago, she never had to carry it alone. In 1888, when William was 10, Alina 8, and Thomas 6, Fiona discovered she was expecting their 4th child. The pregnancy was more difficult than her previous ones, requiring her to rest more than she liked. "You're not invincible, you know," Tanner scolded gently when he caught her trying to hang laundry despite the doctor's orders to take it easy. "Let Maria handle the housework. That's why we hired her." "I'm not used to sitting idle," Fiona protested, but allowed him to lead her to a chair on the porch. "It feels strange not to be busy. Consider it practice for when we're old and gray," he teased, kissing her forehead. "Sitting on this porch watching our grandchildren run wild." The image made her smile. "Do you think we'll have many grandchildren?" "Dozens," Tanner declared confidently. "William already has his eye on the banker's daughter, though he thinks I haven't noticed." "He's 10, Fiona laughed. "Never too early to plan ahead," Tanner replied with a wink. Sarah Rose Hayes arrived on a beautiful October morning in 1889, pink and perfect with a dusting of dark hair like her father's. Unlike her siblings, who had been robust from birth, Sarah was delicate, requiring extra care during her first weeks of life. Fiona and Tanner took turns walking the floor with her at night when she was colicky, singing lullabies and telling stories. The other children adapted to their new sister with minimal jealousy, William particularly taking his role as eldest brother seriously. "I'll always protect her, Pa," he promised solemnly as he peered into the cradle. "Just like you protected Ma when she was sad." Tanner's eyes met Fiona's over their son's head, the shared memory of that rainy day binding them together across the years. As Sarah grew stronger, life at Whispering Pines settled back into its rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper, weathering the economic uncertainties that plagued the country in the early 1890s. Tanner's sound management and Fiona's careful accounting saw them through when other ranches failed. Their children thrived. William, showing his father's head for business, began taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. Alina discovered a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of their mountain home on paper and canvas. Thomas, true to his energetic nature, excelled at breaking horses, showing an almost supernatural ability to calm the wildest animals. Little Sarah, once past her fragile beginnings, revealed herself as a bright, curious child with her mother's gift for seeing the best in everyone. In 1895, when Fiona and Tanner had been married for 18 years, they took their first trip away from the ranch together, leaving William, now 17, in charge under Miguel's supervision. They traveled by train to San Francisco, marveling at the ocean neither had seen before, enjoying the luxury of time alone together. "We should do this more often," Tanner said as they walked along the beach, waves lapping at their feet. "Not wait another 18 years. "Agreed," Fiona replied, thinking of how quickly their children were growing, how soon they would begin their own lives. "Perhaps next time we can see the East Coast. I'd like to show you Pennsylvania someday." "Anywhere you want to go," he promised. "The world is ours to explore." When they returned home, they found Whispering Pines running smoothly under William's care, confirmation that they had raised their son well, and that the legacy they were building would continue beyond them. That Christmas, as the family gathered around the table, now including Miguel and Lucia with their 3 children, Charlie with his stories of the early days, and several of the hands with nowhere else to go for the holiday, Fiona looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight and felt her heart swell with gratitude. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, rising to her feet with her glass in hand. "To family, both those born to us and those chosen, to the home we've built together, and to love that carries us through both joy and sorrow." "To love," Tanner echoed, his eyes finding hers across the table, still filled with the same warmth that had first begun to thaw her frozen heart all those years ago. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the children had gone to bed, Fiona and Tanner stood on the porch beneath a sky brilliant with stars. The ranch lay quiet around them, peaceful in the winter night. "Sometimes," Fiona said softly, "I still can't believe this is my life. That day you found me in the mud, I thought I'd never be happy again." Tanner wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. "I'm glad I was wrong that day." "Wrong about what?" "When I said I'd carry your sorrow," he murmured against her hair. "The truth is, you've carried mine just as often. We've carried each other." Fiona turned in his embrace to face him, noting the silver now threading through his brown hair, the lines of laughter around his eyes, evidence of the years they'd spent building their life together. "That's what makes it work," she said, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "That's what makes it last." In the spring of 1900, as a new century dawned, William Hayes married Catherine Peterson, the banker's daughter he had admired since childhood. The wedding, held at Whispering Pines beneath flowering apple trees, brought together the entire community to celebrate. "Mother, are you crying?" Eleanor asked as they watched the young couple exchange vows. "Happy tears," Fiona assured her, accepting the handkerchief Tanner silently offered. "It seems like just yesterday he was taking his first steps." "Now he's starting his own journey," Tanner said, his arm around his wife's waist. "Just as we did." William and Catherine built their home on a corner of the ranch property, close enough for family dinners but far enough for privacy. Within a year, they welcomed their first child, a son they named James Tanner Hayes. "Grandmother," Fiona said wonderingly as she held her first grandchild, "I never imagined I'd live to see this day." "I did," Tanner replied, gently stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. "The first of many, I hope." As if fulfilling his prediction, Eleanor announced her engagement the following year to David Morris, a young lawyer who had recently moved to Ardmore. They married in the town church and settled in a house near his practice, though they visited the ranch frequently. Thomas, now 19, showed no signs of settling down, instead developing a reputation as the finest horse trainer in 3 counties. His work took him away from Whispering Pines for months at a time, but he always returned with stories and gifts, his wanderlust balanced by his deep attachment to home. Sarah, their youngest at 12, was blossoming into a thoughtful young woman with her father's quiet strength and her mother's compassionate heart. She excelled in school and talked of becoming a teacher someday. "Our children are finding their own paths," Fiona remarked one evening as she and Tanner reviewed the ranch accounts together, a task they had shared throughout their marriage. "Each so different, yet all carrying pieces of us forward." "And pieces of your parents and mine," Tanner added. "That's the beauty of family. Nothing truly ends, it just transforms." In 1902, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a gathering that filled Whispering Pines with laughter and music. Friends and family from near and far came to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a legend in the county. Sheriff Miller, now retired and walking with a cane, made a point of seeking out Fiona. "I remember when you first came to Ardmore," he said, his voice gravelly with age. "Such a sad young woman. Look at you now, the heart of this whole community." "I had help finding my way," Fiona replied, her eyes finding Tanner across the room where he bounced Eleanor's new baby on his knee. "He's a good man," the former sheriff acknowledged. "Always knew he would be. That's why I pointed him toward your cabin that rainy day." Fiona stared at him in surprise. "You sent him to help me," Miller shrugged, a small smile lifting his weathered face. "Noticed him watching you in town, figured he might be what you needed and you might be what he needed too." Glad to see I was right. The revelation that their meeting hadn't been entirely chance gave Fiona a new appreciation for the mysterious ways fate worked, and for the observant sheriff, who had seen possibility where others saw only grief. As the years continued to pass, Whispering Pines adapted to the changing times. Tanner, with William's encouragement, invested in modern farming equipment and expanded into new ventures, ensuring the ranch's prosperity into the new century. Fiona, alongside her daughter-in-law Catherine, started a small canning business using fruit from the orchard that had grown from a memorial to a thriving enterprise. In 1910, when Fiona was 56 and Tanner 64, he suffered a mild heart attack that forced him to reduce his physical labor around the ranch. Though he recovered well, the incident served as a reminder of mortality that sobered them both. "I'm not ready to lose you," Fiona told him one night as they lay together, her head on his chest where she could hear the reassuring beat of his heart. "You won't for a good long while yet," he promised, stroking her hair, now streaked with silver like his own. "But when the time comes, whether it's me first or you remember that love doesn't end with death. My parents taught me that, and yours taught you." "I know," she whispered, thinking of how her parents' memory had remained a living force in their family. Their grandchildren, though never having met them, knew their stories and values. The orchard bloomed each spring in their honor. The grief that had once threatened to destroy Fiona had transformed into a bittersweet appreciation for the fleeting nature of life and the enduring power of love. "Besides," Tanner added with the mischievous smile that still made her heart skip, "I plan to haunt you if I go first. You'll never be rid of me, Fiona Hayes." "Promise?" she asked, only half joking. "Cross my heart," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. In 1915, as war raged in Europe, their family experienced its own sorrows. Thomas, who had finally married at 34, lost his wife in childbirth. Though the baby, a daughter, survived, Thomas was inconsolable in his grief. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed to his parents as he held his motherless child. "How do I live with this pain?" Fiona and Tanner exchanged a look heavy with understanding. "One day at a time," Fiona said gently, "and you let us help you carry it just as your father once helped me." Thomas and his daughter, whom he named Hope, moved back to Whispering Pines. Surrounded by family, he gradually found his way through grief, becoming a devoted father who kept his wife's memory alive through stories and photographs. Watching their son navigate his loss, Fiona was struck by how the pattern of their own beginning had repeated grief transformed through love and community into something bearable, even eventually beautiful. By 1920, Whispering Pines had expanded to include homes for 3 generations of the Hayes family. William and Catherine's children were reaching adulthood. Aliner's family visited regularly from Denver, where David's law practice had grown successful. And Thomas had found a measure of happiness again, focused on raising his daughter and training horses with the same gentle patience he showed both. Sarah, who had indeed become a teacher, married the town doctor in 1919 after a long courtship. They lived in Ardmore but spent every Sunday at the ranch, continuing the tradition of family dinners that had begun decades earlier. Fiona, now in her mid-60s, found deep satisfaction in the role of family matriarch, teaching recipes and skills to younger generations, sharing stories of the early days and watching the love she and Tanner had nurtured branch out in countless directions. "We did well, didn't we?" she asked Tanner one evening as they sat on the porch of the home they had built together. Though both moved more slowly now, their minds remained sharp, their love undimmed by the passage of time. "Better than well," he replied, taking her hand in his. The skin was thinner now, marked by age spots and veins, but the gesture remained as comforting as it had been on that long-ago day when he'd helped her from the mud. "We created something that will outlast us both." In the spring of 1923, Tanner Hayes passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 77, having lived to see his grandchildren grow and his first great-grandchild born. The funeral was attended by people from throughout the county, many coming to pay respects to the man who had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of kindness and integrity. Fiona, standing with her children and grandchildren beside the grave on the hill overlooking Whispering Pines, felt the full weight of her grief, but also the strength of the love that surrounded her, the family that would help her carry her sorrow just as Tanner had promised to do so many years before. "He taught us how to live," William said as they walked back to the house after the service. "And he taught us how to love. That doesn't die with him." In the years that followed, Fiona found new purpose in recording the family's history, writing down the stories of Whispering Pines from its humble beginnings to its present prosperity. She wanted future generations to understand the foundation upon which their lives were built, not just the land and buildings, but the values and love that had sustained them through good times and bad. Often in the quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and imagine Tanner beside her, just as he had been for nearly 50 years. Sometimes she thought she could feel his presence, hear his voice in the wind through the pines that gave their home its name. "I'm still carrying your sorrow," the wind seemed to whisper, "and someday we'll be together again." Until that day came, Fiona continued to live fully, finding joy in her growing family and satisfaction in the knowledge that the love she and Tanner had shared would echo through generations, yet unborn, a legacy more enduring than any material possession. When Fiona Blackett Hayes died in her sleep at the age of 84 in 1938, she was laid to rest beside Tanner on the hillside overlooking the ranch. Their descendants gathered to say goodbye to the woman whose journey from devastating grief to profound joy had inspired them all. "They're together again," William said, now a grandfather himself with silver hair and his father's kind eyes, carrying each other's sorrows and joys through eternity. As the family made their way back to Whispering Pines, the home that had grown from a simple cabin to a sprawling ranch supporting multiple generations, a gentle rain began to fall. And if anyone noticed the wildflowers that seemed to spring up overnight on the fresh grave, they simply smiled, remembering an old story about a cowboy who once brought flowers to a grieving girl and offered to share her burden. The legacy of Tanner and Fiona Hayes lived on not just in the prosperous ranch they had built or the family they had raised, but in the example they had set of love's transformative power, its ability to heal wounds, bridge differences, and create something beautiful and enduring from the broken pieces of a shattered heart. In the end, the story that began with sorrow in the mud of a rainy Colorado day concluded with the promise fulfilled. No one who is truly loved ever has to carry their grief alone.